A very good day to you. Sustainability has emerged as a top global concern, driven by intensifying climate change, dwindling resources, and widening social inequalities. Today, we want to explore the intersection of digital innovation and environmental conservation through natural capital monetization, a process that quantifies, verifies, and monetizes a country's natural assets as high-value carbon credits. Now, for context, Laconic, a Chicago-based environmental intelligence leader, insights-driven sustainability development has the potential to generate as much as US $500 million of carbon credits for the Provincial Government of Bali over 20 years. In this podcast episode, I, technology journalist Paul Mah, speaks with Andrew Gilmour, the Chief Executive Officer from Laconic. We are also joined by Alex Leong, a Managing Director of digital transformation services company, Temus, who is their technology partner. What are the top obstacles to decarbonization today, and how can we harness our finite natural assets for the greatest beneficial outcomes? Crucially, how can we hasten the journey towards sustainability? Andrew and Alex, great to have both of you here with us today. Could you introduce your roles at Laconic and Temus respectively?
Sure. Thanks, Paul. I'm Andrew Gilmour. I'm the co-founder and chief executive officer of Laconic. And as you so eloquently introduced me already, we are a leading global provider of environmental intelligence services to governments around the world, and the developer, along with our technology partner, Temus, of the world's first natural capital monetization platform.
Thank you, Andrew. My name is Alex Leong. I'm a managing director at Temus, and Temus is the digital transformation champion for Temasek Holdings. It's a JV between Temasek and UST Global. And my role in Temus is the co-lead of technology.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's great to have both of you in the room together with me today. What is the greatest problem around sustainability, and why should we care about carbon credits in general?
Great question, Paul. I think that the single greatest challenge with sustainability is dispelling the myth that most people hold in their mind that sustainable development costs more money or requires additional effort or resources. In fact, what we found is that utilizing the natural capital monetization process, we're actually able to convert the natural resources of a country synthetically into money. And that money can be used to fund sustainable development initiatives and create that virtuous circle, sustainable development that protects and sustains the natural environment while facilitating economic growth.
Sounds like an intriguing idea, but isn't people already doing that right now? Or are there challenges or barriers to that?
Well, people are doing it, but they're doing it at very small scale. And one of the things that we've been able to develop with our team at Laconic, assisted by Alex and his team at Temus, is to create the world's first scalable environmental intelligence platform. And so that we can do this at the nation scale level. So it's very difficult to monetize 1 carbon credit or 10 carbon credits. It's much easier to monetize 1 million tons or 10 million tons of carbon. And I'll use an example of our current work in Bali. In Bali, the average rice farmer farms a little more than 4 hectares of land. They cannot access the carbon markets or the larger financial markets. And so the only way to affect change at scale is to work in partnership with the sovereign and the sub-sovereign entities to sense at scale and to monetize at scale, so that we can then ensure that the financial flows go directly to those individual stakeholders. And in that, we can lift up people that had no access to either a technology platform or financial markets in the past.
Andrew, you mentioned partnership, right? And obviously part of the partnership will involve working with governments. And I think you mentioned technology as well. Is that why you've been working with Temus on this?
Yes, it's exactly why. The Temus team has unparalleled expertise in large-scale data analytics, systems and platform generation. And so we've been able to leverage their expertise and the greater expertise of the kind of the Singapore technology ecosystem to rapidly develop really a fundamental new way of looking at the environment at scale.
Alex, you want to share with us a little bit more about how you've been working with Koning on this?
Sure, Paul. So I think at Temus, we're very excited to be able to work with Andrew and his team on such a large-scale and globally impactful project. I think the ambition of what Andrew's vision of seeking to achieve is very bold and very, I would say, change-worthy in terms of the impact that it has on the ESG environment. We bring alongside our capabilities across strategy, transformation, technology, data and AI, and human-centric design to be able to put forward a solution that would be relevant to all stakeholders that are involved within the very complex environment of ESG. And I would love to tell you more about it if we can go into the details.
Sure, of course. Thanks for sharing, Alex. So back to you, Andrew. Can you tell us a little bit more about natural capital monetization? I mean, I know you alluded to that earlier on in this conversation, but could you give us the lowdown facts about that?
Sure, Paul. So, in general, the history of economic development of mankind is inextricably intertwined with our relationship with the surrounding environment. What we have done as a society and as a species over the past 250 years has been to really permanently extract value and resources from the surrounding environments. And that's, created a range of imbalances that we see today with, climate change and the like. The rise of big data and sophisticated geospatial analytics allows us to quantify natural capital in such a way that we can create a value stream from it without removing it from the surrounding environment. Right? So, it's really a synthetic process when you think of it that way. And this really allows natural capital monetization to be the driving force for sustainable development because we're not destroying landscapes and destroying cultures and the like. We're in fact preserving and protecting the landscape and then extracting value from it. You mentioned in your introduction to the podcast, carbon credits. That is probably the most accessible form of natural capital monetization today, but it's not the only form of natural capital monetization. We could monetize other greenhouse gas emissions. We could monetize rainfall, erosion, water temperatures, and the like, all driven by a sophisticated geospatial or data analysis platform. So the short version, because it is quite sophisticated from a technical point of view as to how it's done, is we sense the natural capital itself. So in carbon, we're looking for carbon stores in the environment, whether they be in the soil, so that we say below ground biomass in the lingo, growing above the ground or above ground biomass, or other carbon sinks. These are sources, again, of natural capital. We're not talking about removing CO2 from the atmosphere directly via technological means. And so we can quantify that utilizing data, whether that be satellite data, drone data, permanent sensor data, or a very old school, we call it ground truthing, which is people in fields taking samples. Go back to the lab and gathering scientific information. Once we know what's there, for carbon, we have to see how things change over time, because it's only the change over time that can be used to generate a carbon credit. Utilizing those same monitoring platforms, we sense every day, each and every day, over the entire scale, whether it's a region, whether it's a continent, or whether it's at a global scale. And then we can identify how much carbon has been sequestered, put into the earth permanently for the benefit. That allows us to mint a carbon credit. One carbon credit is roughly equivalent to, well, it is equivalent, I should say, to 1 ton of CO2e, or the equivalent of 1 ton of carbon dioxide. And then it can be traded globally. And There are buyers of these credits. They want to offset their own emissions. Singapore Airlines is a buyer of credits. Shell here in Singapore is a large buyer of carbon credits to offset their hydrocarbon emissions. And they pay money, dollars for that. And so through our program, those funds go back to our governmental partner. And the government is able to utilize those funds to further their sustainable development goals. Bali, we're utilizing those funds to stop the burning of rice straw at the end of each rice harvest, which creates noxious fumes. Residents in Singapore will know that when the wind blows the wrong way during burn season from Malaysia and Indonesia, the choking clouds. So there's a direct health benefit, but also we're putting more natural capital back into the ecosystem this way, because what was burnt and became CO2 now becomes compost and fertilizer that's freely available to the farmers to use to grow their crops. So instead of buying fertilizer, they get free compost through the program, and that's funded by the government through the sale of carbon credits. So now the natural capital monetization process creates this virtuous circle and enables the flow of funds to lift up communities, upskill workers, and drive economic growth.
Thank you, Andrew. I think you've answered my next question as well. How does this accelerate the journey towards sustainability? So it's really good to hear that you could create a virtuous cycle by itself that actually generates greater benefits, right, than you get at the start. So what can we do to help speed up adoption of this service?
The single best way to speed up the adoption of the service is to grow the global financial market for the clearing, settlement, and trading of carbon credits. Today, the carbon markets they're very balkanized. There are multiple registries. There are competing methodologies for the verification of carbon that's being sequestered. And because of this, carbon credits are either traded bilaterally, so directly from the producer to the end user, or if they're traded across an exchange, they're traded at very low volumes, 10,000 credits, 15,000 credits. Like, when you think of carbon credit, its value is derived from the underlying carbons in the ground. So that makes it a financial derivative, like an interest rate swap or a credit default or a collateralized debt obligation. Trillions of dollars of these instruments trade globally every single day. And so if we can make a carbon credit a financial derivative through standardization and the publishment of devices that allow various market participants to talk using the same language about the same thing, then the market will grow. And as the market grows, the demand will increase for carbon. And then satisfying that demand will drive more supply and give greater opportunities for natural capital monetization, not only across Asia, but across the globe generally.
Thank you, Andrew. It sounds like there is quite a fair bit of technology involved. You did mention that everything is grounded in science, and there is the need to do different kind of readings through satellites, through different means. How do you put them all together?
How we do that is with a program or a platform, I should say, that we architected and Temus is building for us, has built and is continuing to build for us. What it does is collect information from satellites, from drones, from any source, whether it's directly sensed or existing data, whether that be free or commercially purchased data. And it aggregates and fuses it together so that when we talk about a particular point on the Earth, we can actually make sure that each data set, the constituent portions of that data set are all, we call it geospatially rectified. It's the technical term, that we're talking about the same spot on the Earth. And that is what allows us to model the changes in carbon stocks, soil density, microbial loads. The applications are actually much, much broader than just the monetization of carbon. That technology is what Alex and his team at Temus are building for us and allowing us to do that at scale in the cloud so that we can bring as much computing resources as is necessary, which is substantial. Alex is really the expert there.
Sure.
To make our vision a reality.
Sure. Alex, could you share with us a little bit more from your perspective?
Oh, definitely. I think at Temus, we're very excited whenever we meet with large, complex problems like this. And I would like to just share a little bit about, give a bit of color on how difficult this process of collecting data is, right? Because we actually have to have sensors that are able to actively monitor the physical environment, right? Take a tree, for example, right? It is part of a larger plot of trees on a plot of land, right? And it needs to be monitored by a satellite, and we need to constantly monitor it over time, right? So being able to put a unique identifier onto this particular tree and make sure that the data that we store is immutable, and being able to graft it in it itself is already a complex data problem, right? You can imagine the large volumes of data that we are collecting. And one of the things that we very early with Andrew and team were discussing is how do we be able to make sense of the data, because we collect so much data, right? The secret sauce, as put by Andrew, right, is really to be able to understand and find that 5-10% of data that is relevant, right? So that's really the foundations of having this platform, to be able to collect and analyze large scale data. Of course, one of the a little bit less obvious things is how do we take this data and make it relevant for the various stakeholders who use this platform. And that in itself, right, leverages a lot of human-centric design, and being able to deliver useful and relevant information in a timely manner to the user is extremely powerful. Okay. One of the other things that we are also very excited to be able to assist Laconic with is sort of being able to bring transparency and bring a certain level of data pedigree to the entire, for example, taking just the carbon markets, for example, to give the carbon markets a common standard across the world, right? Because as Andrew said, there are a lot of different standards, regulations, and all that. I remember 10, 12, 15 years ago, I was a financial analyst with Barclays, and we had just launched at that juncture the Barclays Global Carbon Index. And the first thought I had was, okay, so what goes into that index, right? Is it just futures? But it is futures on what specifically? If you ask the right questions, you realize that they are an underlying, which has a lot of questions to it. Who does the verifications? Who does the standardizations? There's a lot of questions there, right? And unless we have a very good foundation of and a very transparent and verifiable standard, right, we are not able to build the foundations on top of where financial innovation and where the various stakeholders of the carbon markets will then be able to say, and with confidence, put their resources into.
You mentioned verification, but early on you spoke about monitoring individual trees. If you're talking about the trees in my estate, probably you can count them, right? But you're talking about some rainforests. It sounds like there'll be a lot of trees. Could you give us a better idea about the magnitude of the problem that you're addressing in terms of the sheer amount of data?
So let's take a satellite technology, for example, right? So today, certain satellite data can capture up to 30 meters, and certain satellite technology can capture up to 10 meters, right? We take the combination of some of these data, triangulate it, and try to extrapolate and using our algorithms to see what kind of data will be useful at a more granular level, right? So that's just one of the complexities of the problem, because as time goes by, the technology advances allow us to have better sensors, have better satellite capturing, and those data, as you can imagine, are very large in volume, both in the unique instances and also the volume in terms of megabytes, for example, right? So being able to process this, being able to sieve out the right relevant information in a timely manner, that is really what we are trying to achieve.
Phenomenal. I mean, when we were chatting earlier today, I didn't realize that satellite technologies change as well. That means the kind of data that you get will change as well, right? So I don't envy you solving these technical challenges. So maybe back to you, Andrew. I mean, we chatted earlier just now, and you mentioned that they're doing some pioneering work in Bali. Could you share with us a little bit more about what are some of the challenges faced by the team, and how you're working with the government to overcome them?
Sure. Well, other than the technical challenges that Alex just mentioned, we are working in partnership with the government. And one of the key things is that when we create a data set that looks at, let's say, the entire island of Bali, which is just over 5,000 square kilometers in land area, 4.5 million permanent residents, 119,000 hectares of rice, about 104,000 hectares of other horticultural activities, is a very broad scale problem. And one of the key things that is important to ensure the success of the Natural Capital Monetization program is how do you get the money to the people, to the stakeholders, not just to the government. And this is very critical for us because it's a question of data equity. It's a question of social equity for us. And by data equity, I mean through natural capital monetization and through the SIDAR platform, we have the ability to give insights to small and medium enterprise owners, whether they be farmers, small plot ranchers, or the like, that previously has only been accessible to large-scale agribusinesses. Right? They can afford the platforms themselves. They buy their own data. It's big business for them. And that gives them an advantage. So one of the things we're trying to do with large-scale sensing and natural capital monetization is not only give money that is created by natural capitalization directly to the stakeholder, but also give data to that stakeholder utilizing human-centric design that Temus is working with us on to give them information in a way that means something to them. Right? So if you need a PhD in soil science to decipher the outputs of our platform, we failed in our job. Right? You need a farmer who understands their land in a way more intuitively than we ever could with remote sensing. They work the land day in and day out. It's part of their livelihood. They understand the natural ebb and flow of the ecological cycles on that land. All the data gives them is another viewpoint and that other piece of insight. Right? And so one of the things that we're working on Bali on is giving insight as to when to begin the harvest. Right? And from satellite imagery, we can compute another metric called NDVI, which stands for Normalized Differential Vegetation Index. But really, you can think of it as an indicator of the health of a crop. And so we can see in a rice paddy, for example, from orbit, where that rice is in its growth cycle. Is it fully mature? Is it ready for harvest and the like? And typically with NDVI, we can see that several days before a farmer that used just their eyes, visual inspection, would choose to begin the harvest. And so by giving them this information, we can decrease the amount of time between the harvests and they can plant more without changing methods, without large-scale technological intervention. And that puts more money in the pockets of the farmer. They've grown more food. So that's just one example of how the data equity comes down. And as Alex mentioned, through the super resolution, the combination of the multiple data sources, we're able to pinpoint where the natural capital that we've monetized comes from. And so now what we can do is we can share some of those revenues directly with the stakeholders. And now they're being rewarded for stewardship of the land rather than being told. It's much more carrot and much less stick. Right? In the old days, we would say, you must conserve, there's a fine, there's a penalty. Compliance is mandatory. We prefer the carrot at Laconic, whereas do this, if it's good for you, your crop yields will go up. You'll make more money. The land will be healthier. And we're going to give you a direct payment. We're going to give you a share of those natural capital monetization proceeds as a reward for your proper stewardship of the land. And the ability to understand which farmer has created their pro rata portion, right, of that money requires highly accurate geospatial information. And so, again, the platform is designed not just to gather the data and monetize the carbon, but to ensure data and social equity on the backside so that everybody is lifted up jointly and we have a successful program.
Thank you so much. It sounds like the team has been putting foot on the ground. I mean, they've been meeting individual farmers as well as, getting the money into their hands. So as you interact with smaller stakeholders, but very many of them, right? Were there any surprises that came along with it?
In Bali, we were surprised when we began the stakeholder engagement process to learn that there are over 1,300 individual rice farming collectives or groups, management groups, generally centered around a particular village. And so when you begin a stakeholder engagement program, you have to work through those organizations. It's part of the traditional Balinese agricultural methods. And Balinese Hinduism is very much tied to the respect for the land and the culture. So in every rice cycle, there are 11 separate ceremonies that each individual farmer goes through in conjunction with a priest in order to ensure the health and the success of that crop. And so we have to work inside of that system. Right? We work at cross currents with our stakeholders if we come in as outsiders and think that just because we have high-tech data that we know better than they know about the stewardship of their land. And so we definitely have to cultivate a true partnership with them, and you build that trust level over time. And so we've been hard at work at Bali for almost 3 years now, 2 years before even the beginning of the rollout of the program, so that our teams are known agents and entities alike. And so it really is a holistic process. It is data-driven, and it is very high-tech, but at the end of the day, it's a human program. And the human element is extremely important to ensuring the success.
Andrew, it's really great to hear that there's really a human touch to this high-tech program. I felt that we have barely began to scratch the surface of natural capital monetization, but it's really great to hear of the great work that the team has been doing, Laconic and Temus. As we end this podcast in just a few moments' time, do you have any final thoughts or to share with us?
No, I want to thank you for your time and the ability to talk about this exciting topic today. And I leave here with hope that as the markets expand, that we can expand our efforts in the ASEAN region and drive a much more value as we go forward into the future.
Alex?
Yes, thanks, Paul and Andrew. I think we really appreciate the opportunity to help Andrew and team and Laconic's ambition in the global marketplace to help us when I mean us, the world as a whole, to make an actual real impact.
Thank you, Andrew and Alex. We have come to the end of our podcast on Nature's Wealth Unveiled, how digital innovation can help Asia capitalize on hidden assets for sustainable growth.